The air inside the train station felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. Voices blurred into a low hum, 1,000 lives rushing past her, but she stood still, her small suitcase clutched so tightly her knuckles whitened. The cracked silver watch on her wrist ticked faintly, uneven, as though mocking the time she had lost. She lifted her eyes toward the arrivals board, though she wasn't waiting for anyone. Her gaze lingered, searching for something that wasn't written there. Her red scarf, creased, frayed at the ends, shifted with each gust that swept through the open doors. It was the only color on her, a bright defiance against the gray that had settled in her chest. She touched it once, almost absent-mindedly, as if reminding herself it was still there. Behind her, laughter erupted, a group of cousins dragging their rolling bags, their voices sharp and familiar. She turned her face away quickly, her jaw tightening. Her throat burned, but no tears came. Not anymore. The weight of paper pressed against the lining of her coat pocket. Legal words, signatures, and seals. Words that erased her, cut her out like she never existed. Her hand brushed against it, then recoiled as if it were fire. "You're not one of us," the echo returned. Cold. Final. A child's balloon slipped from a tiny hand nearby, floating up to the high ceilings. She followed it with her eyes until it was swallowed by the shadows of steel and glass. A strange ache tugged at her ribs. Loss had a shape, she thought. It rose, it vanished, and no one reached for it. The announcement board flickered. A train groaned in, metal wheels screaming against tracks. People surged forward, pulling her with them. Her suitcase dragged like a stone behind her. She whispered under her breath, a voice cracked and low, "If they didn't want me, then they can't have it either." Her pulse trembled in her wrist. The watch ticked louder, as if alive, as if urging her. The scarf slipped slightly from her shoulder, and she caught it, clutching it to her chest with a sudden fierceness. The cloth carried the scent of another time, warmth, belonging, the ghost of hands that once tied it around her neck. She stepped closer to the train, the crowd pressing on every side. Her eyes, steady now, found something in the blur of strangers. Not an answer, not yet, just a decision that burned quietly behind her silence. The cracked watch ticked once more. And she did not look back. The train lurched forward, pulling her deeper into its hollow belly of whispers and rattling glass. She sat by the window, her suitcase tucked at her feet, the red scarf now coiled in her lap like something fragile that might unravel if she let go. Outside, families collided into embraces on the platform. Hands clutched shoulders, lips pressed against cheeks, laughter cut through the cold. She pressed her forehead against the glass, feeling the sting. Nobody was waiting for her. Nobody would ever wait. Her eyes dropped to the cracked watch. It had belonged to her father, always too loose on her wrist, but she refused to fix it. She remembered his voice, low and steady, "Time isn't about minutes. It's about what you do with them." He said it the night he came home late from work, smelling of iron and sweat, lifting her into his arms though his back was breaking. That was the last night she saw him alive. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes, gripping the scarf tighter. He had given it to her one winter when her fingers were blue from cold. "Red keeps the heart alive," he had said, tucking the ends beneath her chin. Now the threads were worn, edges frayed, but she carried it as though it still held his warmth. The train swayed. Her reflection wavered on the glass, tired eyes, hollow cheeks. The past months had carved her into something unrecognizable. Nights spent calculating rent, days folding rejection letters, afternoons staring at bank statements until the numbers blurred. And then, the will. The cousins smiling through their teeth as the lawyer's voice declared her absence in black ink. She wasn't a daughter. She wasn't blood. She was nothing. Her jaw tightened. She remembered her cousin's hand brushing hers once at a family dinner, the condescending smile, "Don't worry, you'll find your way." She had believed it. She had been naive. The scarf slipped from her lap. She bent quickly, clutching it again, holding it to her chest as though it might keep her from falling apart completely. Movement stirred at the edge of her vision. Across the aisle, a man sat quietly, his gaze lowered but too still, too deliberate. He hadn't spoken since boarding. His silence pressed against her like a question. She looked away, pretending not to notice. The train slowed at the next station. Passengers rose, laughter and footsteps echoing down the aisle. She remained seated, her suitcase untouched. She could step off, vanish into another city, leave it all behind. But her body resisted. The scarf twisted in her hands. The cracked watch ticked unevenly. She stood, then hesitated, her eyes locking briefly with the stranger's. He didn't smile. He only looked, as though he had been waiting for that exact moment. Her breath caught. And for the first time in weeks, she stopped moving. Rain tapped lightly against the train windows, soft at first, then harder, drumming like an anxious heartbeat. The girl hugged her scarf tighter, feeling the warmth drain with every drop that streaked across the glass. The stranger across from her shifted slightly, and the scrape of worn leather shoes against the floor caught her attention. They were scuffed, tired, carrying the weight of miles she could almost feel in her chest. He pulled a wallet from his coat pocket, sliding it open just enough for a glimpse. A small, folded photograph peeked out, a younger version of him, smiling with a girl who wore a scarf like hers. Something in her chest jolted, sharp and unsteady. She blinked, then looked away, pretending not to notice, but the pull was undeniable. The train rocked on its tracks. Outside, the rain blurred the world into smudges of gray and silver. Her mind wandered to the months of scraping by, the nights counting every coin, the mornings waking up to a silence so complete it screamed. And yet, here was someone else who had clearly walked through storms of his own, his presence quiet but insistent. She caught him watching her, though she was certain she hadn't moved. There was something in the tilt of his head, the way his eyes softened when they met hers, that mirrored her own exhaustion, her own resolve. It was almost too much, like looking into a mirror she hadn't wanted. Should I speak? Should I move? Her pulse rattled with indecision. Every fiber in her body told her to flee, to disappear into the city beyond the station, to leave the inheritance, the betrayal, and the suffocating weight of family behind. And yet, some unnameable force tethered her to this quiet stranger. Thunder rolled across the sky, distant but insistent. A shiver ran down her spine, her scarf slipping slightly from her shoulder. The rain seemed to echo the turmoil within her, relentless, chaotic, impossible to ignore. She thought of the will again, of the cousin's smirks, of every door that had closed in her face. Anger burned in her chest, a fire she didn't want to extinguish. But now there was another ember, curiosity, connection, a strange sense of recognition that was almost dangerous in its intensity. The stranger's fingers tapped a soft rhythm against his wallet, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world had shrunk to the space between them. Was this fate, or something more calculated, a quiet manipulation she couldn't yet read? The train slowed, approaching another station. Her hand hovered over the suitcase handle. Her eyes flicked to him once more. He didn't speak. He didn't move. And for the first time since boarding, she didn't know whether she wanted to leave, or stay. The rain pressed harder against the window, the thunder closer, and the question lingered, unresolved, like the pause before a storm breaks completely. The train screeched to a halt, brakes hissing like a warning. She stood abruptly, her suitcase dragging, the red scarf tangling around her wrist. For a heartbeat, she thought of stepping off, vanishing into the crowd, leaving the stranger, leaving the inheritance, leaving everything behind. But her feet didn't move. She paused, staring down the aisle, feeling the weight of every glance from passing passengers. Some of them looked curious, others suspicious, and a few pitied her. Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence, she whispered to herself, the words almost swallowed by the rumble of the train. Her fingers brushed the scarf again, the fabric frayed but stubbornly vibrant against the gray of her coat. She remembered her father's hands, the winter night, the warmth he pressed into her. That memory tangled with the present, bitter and sweet at once. Then, something shifted. Across from her, the stranger lifted the red scarf, holding it between his hands, careful, almost reverent. Her breath hitched. She had thought it lost, just another piece of herself floating in the wind, but here it was, returned or mirrored in a way that made her chest ache. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, steady and quiet. In that gaze was recognition, a weight she couldn't name. She wanted to step forward. She wanted to flee. Her mind spun with possibilities, regrets, and the slow, bitter taste of betrayal. Her cousins, their smiles, the lawyer's clipped tones, they all pressed on her memory like invisible hands. And yet, here was someone else, someone entirely unknown, holding a fragment of her life like it mattered. A woman with a toddler bumped past, eyes flicking toward her briefly, whispering something sharp to a companion. Judgment. It wasn't harsh, but it was enough. Another man in a dark coat glanced at the scarf, then at her face, and shook his head almost imperceptibly. The world seemed to watch her, measuring her worth in silence. Her hands trembled. The suitcase felt impossibly heavy beneath her fingers. She almost turned, almost stepped into the rain outside the station, almost let everything, anger, inheritance, memory, slip away. But she didn't. The stranger shifted, holding the scarf a little closer to his chest. His lips curved in the faintest, most ambiguous smile, part recognition, part challenge. Her pulse raced. The train seemed to sigh around them. Rain streaked the windows, thunder rumbled low and distant, and she felt every heartbeat as if it belonged to someone else entirely. She took a step back, then stopped. The scarf slipped from her hands again. She didn't reach for it. Not yet. And in that suspended moment, between choice and hesitation, between leaving and staying, the world held its breath with her. The train rattled into the final station, and the girl followed the crowd onto the slick, rain-darkened platform. She didn't know why she walked beside him, why the soft weight of the scarf in his hands pressed on her chest like it carried a secret she needed to know. A flash of movement caught her eye, his wallet, slightly open as he adjusted his coat. There, a small business card peeked out, gold-embossed letters she instantly recognized. Her stomach twisted. The company she had spent months applying to, sending endless emails, watching opportunities slip through her fingers, they belonged to him. He noticed her glance but said nothing. Just held the scarf, and in that quiet, something shifted. Her breath caught. Her mind raced back to the first night she held it, the red scarf, frayed edges, her father's warmth pressed into it. And now, in his hands, it carried another memory, another grief. It belonged to his daughter, she realized. The same age, the same bright stubbornness. The same absence that left spaces too vast to fill. A memory tugged at her throat, her father's words, "Time isn't about minutes. It's about what you do with them." She had laughed then, thinking she understood. Now the phrase looped back, twisted and bitter. Time had brought her here, to him, to this moment where choices collided with grief, anger, and opportunity. She felt the sharp pull of a point of no return. Every decision she had made, the stolen inheritance, the silent rage at family, the months of loneliness, led her here. And yet, for the first time, her fury mixed with something else, a fragile, dangerous possibility. He looked up, meeting her eyes. There was no judgment, only a quiet weight that made her knees ache. The train's roar behind them faded into a dull hum, the rain's rhythm matching her pulse. She held the suitcase, felt the scarf twitch in his hands, and suddenly understood, leaving, walking away, disappearing. it was no longer an option. Not when everything she thought she knew about loss, betrayal, and power had been rewritten in the space of a glance, a scarf, a wallet. A door loomed ahead, framed in the station's flickering light. The unknown waited beyond it, authority, chance, reckoning. Her hand hovered over the handle, trembling, and then she pushed it open. Inside, the room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a quiet reminder that some battles were fought not in the streets but in silence. The red scarf slid from his hands into hers, heavier now, saturated with new meaning. She stepped forward, suitcase in tow, heart hammering. And as the door clicked closed behind her, the world outside ceased to matter, everything had changed. The train station was quieter now, the chaos of morning replaced by the soft patter of rain and the low hum of cleaning carts. She stood where she had started, the red scarf tucked carefully into the crook of her arm, her suitcase beside her like a faithful shadow. The world felt familiar, yet utterly changed. He appeared across the platform, the stranger whose silence had pressed against her chest for hours, for days in memory. His eyes were steady, but there was something in them she hadn't expected, recognition, not for her, but for the echo of someone lost long ago. "You remind me of her," he said quietly, not reaching, not pleading. She could see it in the way his fingers hovered over his wallet, the photograph folded neatly inside. The scarf had belonged to his daughter. Now it was hers to hold, to understand, to honor. Her pulse stuttered. She could have wielded anger, revenge, or fear. Instead, she smiled faintly and let it go. With deliberate hands, she returned the scarf to him. He took it without words, clutching it to his chest as if holding a memory alive. Time felt suspended. The cracked watch on her wrist ticked unevenly, a familiar reminder of every choice that had led here. She breathed deeply, feeling the months of betrayal, poverty, and loneliness settle into a strange calm. She had given away the inheritance in silence, walking away from the money, the power, the hollow victories. The weight of the world pressed less heavily now because she had chosen something heavier, grace. The train rolled in, and she turned to step onto it, suitcase in hand. He did not follow. He would not follow. His world, his grief, and the daughter she mirrored were his. And yet, in that brief intersection of lives, something had shifted irrevocably. Her heart ached, a mixture of release and longing. She understood now that some battles are not won with wealth, cunning, or revenge. They are won in the surrender of what you think you must claim. She stepped forward, letting the train carry her, letting the rain wash over her, letting herself be reborn in the space between loss and freedom. She looked once more at him, the red scarf pressed to his chest, and thought, some connections are not meant for permanence. They exist to awaken, to shift, to carve something indelible into your soul. The suitcase rolled lightly beside her, a companion now empty of all its past burdens. The station faded behind her, but the echo remained, the echo of a life changed not by what she took, but by what she chose to leave behind. And as the train vanished into the gray distance, she whispered to the wind, almost to herself, not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The city smelled of rain and asphalt as she walked along the quiet street, her suitcase lighter than it had been in months. The wind tugged at her hair, but she let it, leaning into the chill like it could sweep away the last remnants of anger and fear. At a small apartment, she placed the red scarf into a drawer, folding it gently. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and touched the frayed edges, illuminating the threads like a quiet reminder of warmth once shared, now preserved in memory. She pressed her fingers briefly against the fabric, whispering softly to herself, sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. Her cracked watch sat on the nightstand, still ticking unevenly, marking time in a rhythm only she could hear. It had become less a measure of minutes and more a companion in reflection, a witness to everything she had endured. On the streets, life went on. She watched a child skip along the sidewalk, a mother tugging a bag behind her, lovers laughing under umbrellas. She felt both a part of it and apart from it, like a shadow brushing past warmth without touching. Loneliness no longer felt like emptiness but a quiet strength, a stillness that allowed her to breathe without expectation. Her mind wandered to the stranger she had met on the train. She didn't know what he would do next, nor did she want to. The memory of his eyes, the scarf pressed to his chest, lingered, a soft ache and a faint illumination in her chest. Their paths had crossed, changed, and then separated, an intersection that left her altered, like a stone turned over in a river. She sipped coffee on a balcony that overlooked the city's gray rooftops. The wind stirred the pages of an old notebook, half filled with ideas and sketches. In the quiet, she realized the inheritance she had once coveted was never money, never revenge. It had always been choice, and she had exercised it fully. A crow cawed from a nearby ledge. She smiled faintly, thinking how small gestures, fleeting moments, and silent recognitions could shape life far more than grand gestures ever could. Her reflection in the window caught her gaze. Stronger. Wiser. Not untouched, but unbroken. She took a deep breath and exhaled into the quiet evening. And as she turned back toward the room, the shadows stretching long across the floor, she whispered to herself, to the city, to the rain that had passed, some paths are meant to leave you wondering, and perhaps wondering is the only way to truly begin.